or some super, super fast, low latency interaction. But ideal would be something like brain-computer interface. Maybe it's some eye tracking or even teeth clicking or something that you could do. But if it just became so natural that just like you think you turn your head to go look at something, if you just do this thing and you zoom in on it and you get more information, that would be pretty magical, that sense of augmenting human capability.
Have you paid attention to this Elon Musk Neuralink thing?
So I actually went out to visit the Neuralink company. It was like the week before they did their big public announcement. And I spent a whole day there kind of deep diving with a bunch of their technical people. And it is exciting stuff because it is, I like to use the word bold for things like that, where it's not just this incremental advance where it's just taking something, fixing a few of the flaws and going out. It is visionary, looking to the future, where the potential upside of this about being able to make the whole automated electronic world something that is directly accessible on both input and output to your brain is really remarkable. And what they've done, I mean, there's a lot of people where you can say it's like, well, other companies might have these capabilities, but clearly they are at the cutting edge. You could argue how far above or behind other companies they might be, but I think it's going to largely work to some degree here. And they're going to be working with people that are like seizure patients, people that are, in many cases, profoundly disabled. And they don't expect it's going to work forever when they put it in. There are all these problems with the brain kind of rejecting implants eventually. And people have done experiments like this for quite a while. It starts off with just one neuron. You stick in one sensor or one actuator. And in the Neuralink case now, they've got tens of thousands that they can put in. So much, much higher fidelity. Even if it doesn't work forever and they're still working out the different the codings, tactics, different installation procedures, somebody's going to go in there and go from being profoundly disabled to probably being able to play a video game, being able to sort of directly control things with your mind, where you start off being able to do maybe just very slowly driving a cursor. And people have done this again for years, where you can slowly move a mouse cursor or something and figure out a click thing. But here, when you have tens of thousands of neurons going in, you could go from this very slow moving something to doing this deep analog, multi-dimensional, like playing a symphony with your brain output potentially, and then potentially feeding information in a way that we can't right now, that you could have this sort of tactile feel to it.
Do you remember Lawnmower Man?
Yeah, vaguely.
That was the idea.
I've thought to myself sometime I should go back and watch that, because I literally have not watched that since it came out when I was a teenager, and the VR is laughable at this point and everything, but it should be good for a chuckle.
Well, I think it was a clunky movie, but the idea was based on a Stephen King book, and the Stephen King book, where there was a guy who was sort of slow, and they did something to him, and all of a sudden he became some super genius, almost godlike character. Like, if this Neuralink stuff does work and you can take a person with profound disabilities and all of a sudden they become the smartest human beings on the planet, that would be really weird.
So I know that was one of the pitches that Elon was making early on, that Elon is very concerned about artificial intelligence. And part of Neuralink was this pitch that, well, maybe we can supercharge humans in a way that the AI won't run away so far, or we can at least interact with them on a more level playing field. I am less sanguine about that. That seems a little bit more of a reach to me, because I suspect that, okay, even if you do put 1 million neurons in, when we're making artificial general intelligences, they're going to have billions and billions of these different connections. And I think that it might be many steps above what a human could be, but if AI becomes possible and takes off, and I am a believer in artificial general intelligence, I think it's probably not as far off as many people believe, that it is likely to be able to accelerate and advance faster than even a Neuralinked human would be able to.
How far away do you think we are from artificial general intelligence?
So by nature, I'm an optimist. I tend to underestimate how long things take. But on the other hand, as a programmer, I've usually been able to say, well, maybe I missed my estimate by 50% while everybody else blew it by 100% or something. I think that we will potentially have clear signs of AGI maybe as soon as a decade from now.
Wow.
Now, lots of people disagree. The majority of scientists working on it think it's like, oh, it's going to be at least a few decades. And you still have a few holdouts that say, oh, it can't happen at all. But I'm a strict materialist. I think that, our minds are just our body in action, and there's no reason why we can't wind up simulating that in some way. So I don't think the question of how far off, there's a lot of numbers that you can play. Like the brain has something like 85 billion neurons in it, and they have something like 10,000 connections between it. And you can multiply those out and compare them to what we have in computer memory and processing time. And you can say that, yeah, within 10 years, those curves should have crossed. But I would even go so far as to say most of those are probably not completely necessary. We know lots of biological systems. Like, we understand the processing that goes on a lot in the visual side, and we don't need nearly as many computer transistors as neurons that are used for processing some of those early layers. So I suspect that even today, some of the government supercomputers, the top 500 list that they have, those are remarkably probably useful for doing artificial intelligence work, where for a long time, for decades, I thought that was sort of just national chest thumping, the top 500 computers, because so many of them, they relied on replacing what used to be the old big iron Cray vector supercomputers, and they really weren't very easy to program. Most programs people want to use, you can't run it on a supercomputer and just be a lot faster. One of the shocking things most people don't really appreciate is the fastest way to do most single-threaded applications is an overclocked gaming computer today. You can't go spend $1 million and buy a computer that will do many tasks faster than what you can just run on a gaming computer. And this is not at all the way things were for decades, where for a long time, you would go spend your millions of dollars on a Cray supercomputer and all of your code would run faster than anything you can get. But it turned out that the processors that you wind up using in high-end gaming systems are, in many cases, the fastest, or in all cases, at least close to as fast for certain serial applications. So the only thing else you can do is pile lots more of them together. And these big computers are football field-sized systems that are just racks and racks of GPUs and CPUs. And nowadays, for a long time, I'd be like, well, I would think, how could I make a faster Quake map build or something on one of those? Because we would sometimes have hours and hours spent processing this. And at one point, we had a computer that was almost in the top 500 at id Software just for making our maps. But I looked at a lot of these supercomputers and I'm like, these are terrible, not very useful for what we want. But now as I look at AI work, and I think that, well, if you're just doing a whole bunch of these kind of general matrix multiplies, that computer right there is probably pretty good. So I would suspect that you could do something, if we had the right algorithms, the right training schedule, and the right time to run through it, that it's probably possible on some systems today, and it'll just still take many years for the right algorithms to wind up being developed, the right training regimens to be run, and faster, cheaper hardware to wind up making it more economical to run all the experiments. Because in so many cases, the trick is not that the minimum requirements exist, but that 1,000 people have thrown themselves at the wall of a problem. Most of them have bounced off and failed, but eventually somebody gets through.
Now, what about quantum computing? Is that something that could potentially break the bottleneck that we have with Moore's law?
So I am not an expert on quantum computing, and I think that many times I beat myself up about it, where there's some simulators online where you can go and work on it, and I should work through the exercises of doing the basic factoring algorithms on quantum computing. But my read on it right now is that it's probably not directly useful for most of the artificial intelligence tasks. The big things that people worry about that are for things like breaking cryptography, breaking the different hashes and encryption methods, that it's possible that in many ways that's almost a terrible technology, because it's a technology that doesn't solve so many of the problems that you'd like it to solve, and it does solve one of the problems you kind of wish nobody was able to solve.
What's that?
Like breaking all of the encryption. If somebody winds up with a quantum computer that they achieve quantum supremacy and it runs past all of